Hey Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for the invitation.
Great, yeah. And so what kind of brings us here today is this idea of walking outside as a way of bringing people together. And on January 6th, actually, you had this great article published in Time magazine that had some tips on how to bridge political divides, pulling from your book, The Way Out. And you know, I'm gonna be honest, I'm searching for some kind of special magic or some quick solution to help bring us together. And what is it about movement, in particular walking something like this environment? What is it about that you think is helpful for bridging divides?
Yeah, so I wrote The Way Out, just to be clear, because I think political polarization today is a first-order problem. It affects how we think and fail to address so many other problems. We're really living in sort of separate realities, and there's no one reason for that. It's a constellation of things that are pulling us apart. And when you have those kinds of disputes or differences, part of what happens physiologically is that we start to create neural pathways in our minds where we can process, you know, information that's consistent with our views, and we ignore or, you know, basically avoid information that is inconsistent. And so basically what I'm saying is that what becomes is our neurological structures have an embedded conflict, and it's hard to process both sides. One of the factors that can help loosen that up and free that up is movement.
That's so interesting. So it's like physically just shaking it out instead of being locked in, you know, behind our keyboards all the time, you know, getting ever really increasingly narrow in our perspectives. Just getting out there gives us some shared kind of experience together, just by virtue of like, hey, I'm seeing the same tree at the same time as you.
Yeah, so there are kind of two pieces of it. One is that we physically, if we just get up by ourselves and move, you know, if we're stuck, we're trying to think about something or write something or talk to somebody, compose an email, we may just feel stuck, and sometimes just getting up and moving and taking a walk or, you know, exercising something physical can help us break set, think, you know, and in fact, that's where most insights come from in work and research is in what they call the white noise space, right? The space where you are driving somewhere or in the shower and you're not actively attending to a task, and that's where an insight comes from, and that's oftentimes because of the physical experience that you're having. So one piece is just moving yourself. The other piece, which is equally or more important, is the capacity to move together. So instead of, in my world, peace building, mediation, we tend to bring people together, sit down at a table, try to talk things out. Most of the time that's great. But when your neurological structures are such that you really can't hear them or process their information, and it's helpful to get up and physically together walk outside, side by side, in an environment that you're sharing, that's moving, and there is something neurological that happens where our mirror neurons fire and start to fire together.
It reminds me of like when drum circles happen, the drummer's heart rates kind of regulate together, and this idea of getting unstuck is kind of cool, like just in a physical way. A friend of mine is a veteran, and I think it might be a military word, a figure of speech of if something's messed up, you got to unfuck it. And so that was one of those insights that I learned working with veterans, actually, with Team Rubicon, a volunteer organization to help respond to disasters, and it was a really powerful experience to move together with a group of folks who probably don't vote the same as me, and unstick sticky situations.
But let me be clear, there are two parts of it. One is just to get out, get unstuck, to move yourself. The other is to move with people, because then what happens is there is a connection that forms, or a reconnection that forms, that when we were just out of sync with each other and living in parallel worlds, and suddenly we're physically moving in sync, and there is something about that that generates a sense of more compassion, more empathy, some feeling of cooperation. And again, that goes back to where humans started, which is walking around the Sahel in hunter-gatherer groups, solving problems together, right? That's where we started, and that taps into that kind of connectivity. So it's both breaking set, you know, fucking things up, and
we'll bleep that later.
Okay, and the capacity to connect and connect physically in a way, particularly if, like, ideologically, emotionally, we're really at odds. To have some kind of physical connection is a secret sauce. It is an opportunity to give you a little bit of a leg up. Doesn't mean that you're gonna, you know, say, yes, I agree completely with your position, but it does mean that some of the affect, you know, and some of the anger and rage dissipates, and a sense of connectedness emerges, which can help the conversation.
I love this idea. You said this word, reconnect. And it reminds me of this book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she talks a lot about remembering and as a way of reconnecting to the earth through plants, and as if we have this in us all inherently. We have this deep connection to the earth and to each other, moving in groups together. And also, you know, I was curious, you know, in your writing your new book and all your other research, you know, I mentioned you know, my veteran friend. I'm wondering, you know, what have you heard from, what's like an insight that you've heard from a Trump voter is what I'm really curious about. That may have surprised you.
I think, well, again, I think what's important to recognize with anybody that you see on the other side is that, of course, they're not all alike, right? There's a lot of variance and there's a lot of difference. I mean, I had a breakthrough. I'm going to take this back, but when I first went to West Point, so our program teaches at West Point. And we were invited to come up to consider working with West Point mid-career people. And I, you know, was raised progressive and left and thought, I don't know if I want to buy into sort of supporting the war machine. And what I found was, at West Point, some very thoughtful, open people who were struggling with a lot of the same issues that we were struggling with in terms of diversity and in terms of, you know, rights and militarism, you know, and the challenges to that. So it really did, you know, what happens when you kind of can drop your position and open up to the other sometimes under the right conditions, you learn that they're actually very nuanced, very different from what you assume them to be. In fact, today, that is one of the biggest drivers of our political polarization, is the misperception that those on the other side have attitudes that are much more extreme than they actually are. And that triggers in me a tendency to feel more extreme, to respond in more extreme ways, and so that's a you know, vicious cycle. Especially when there's a couple computer programs egging us on to get clout and things like that. No, absolutely. There are many structures that encourage this, but it does end up in this place where I really believe that they're insane, right, and way out there, and that triggers, you know, a less rational response in me. And so anything that can break through that, and one thing that breaks through that is just contact with other people. So I think what I've been learning from Trump supporters is that many of them have real experiences in their life that readied them for someone that says, I hear you, I'm listening to you, and I'm going to respond to you. Whether he does or not, you know, it doesn't matter. There is a context to this that we forget and just think these people are, you know, they're idiots or zealots. So it is, you know, again, it's just simply humanizing people on the other side.
In our next segment, I do want to ask you about how to make those initial breakthroughs, because of this idea that it's kind of fun to dig in and to, you know, relish the fight. So stay tuned for our next segment.
Okay,
thanks, Peter.
Sure.